Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session today. We're going to talk about coping strategies. This is our roadmap to regulation, helping children cope with big emotions. My name's Laura Sibold. I'm a nationally certified speech-language pathologist. I'm also an autism spectrum disorder clinical specialist and a certified youth mental health specialist. And I'm so excited to be here with you guys today to talk about building independence and supporting our kids with their coping strategies as we're still dealing with some of that fallout from COVID-19. Now, it seems like the numbers are even higher than ever, and students coming back into school and they're struggling and they're trying to figure out how to manage these emotions, what's happening, and how do they be their best selves in the school setting. And so I'm here to talk you through and help you with that today. So today's session is hosted by Florida Atlantic University, the Center for Autism and Related Disabilities, or FAU CARD. Also PEPSA, the Partnership for Effective Programs for Students with Autism. The mission for FAU CARD for the Center for Autism and Related Disabilities provides expert counseling, consulting, training, and support at no charge for all people across all race, ethnic, and gender groups with autism and related disabilities, their families, employers, the professionals and community and governmental agencies serving them. The vision, FAU CARD provides support and assistance with the goal of optimizing the potential of all people across all race, ethnic, and gender groups with autism and related disabilities. So where does FAU CARD serve? They're in 5 counties: Indian River, St. Lucie, Martin, Okeechobee, and Palm Beach. They have 3 offices in Boca Raton, Jupiter, and Port St. Lucie. They provide one dynamic service. And if you look at the bottom of your screen, you can see the phone number 561-297-2055, the website www.autism.fau.edu, or their email address at card@fau.edu. Some of the services offered at no charge: family and school consultations, trainings and workshops, public education, referrals and resources, adult hangout groups, and much, much more. So a little bit about me. I did share something about myself when we first got started, but a little bit more. I've worked with children for the past 10+ years. I'm a certified relationship development, or RDI, educator. I've co-authored 2 workbooks with PEPSA Publishing called The Trauma-Informed Social Emotional Toolbox and The Parenting Toolbox. I'm a 2022 ASHA Convention Topic Committee member in the area of business practices for speech-language pathology. I'm a member of the Multicultural Affairs Committee of the Maryland Speech, Language, and Hearing Association. I'm a member of the DEI Committee for the Pennsylvania Speech, Language, and Hearing Association. I'm also a member of the College Autism Network, as well as the Pennsylvania Inclusive Higher Education Consortium. My current role is as the Associate Director for the Center of Accessibility and Learning Services and Neurodiversity Initiatives at Chestnut Hill College in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. But a lot of my work actually started before I came to Philly in the Washington, D.C. metro area as a speech-language pathologist in the public school setting, and then as an instructional supervisor, instructional specialist for autism programs, also in the public school setting. So for all you educators out there that are returning to classrooms soon and have been working with kids, I just want to take my hats off to you and say thank you so much for all the work that you're doing on behalf of our children. I know what it's like, and I know the workload, and I know the stress. So I just want to say that you're so appreciated for everything that you're doing. And I hope that today's session is able to help with some of the strategies and supports we talk about here today. My goal is to really be as functional as possible to give you guys like real strategies and resources that you can implement immediately. So financial disclosures: I receive royalties from PEPSA Publishing and Media because of the 2 published workbooks, and also being a moderator and a presenter for them. And as I mentioned before, I'm a member of ASHA, MASHA, and PASHA. I'm also receiving payment for this presentation from FAU CARD. So our objectives today: One, you're going to explore dynamic learning strategies for co-regulation and self-regulation. And that kind of ties in with our talk about coping strategies, right? Attendees, you're going to review the concept of double empathy. So I'm not sure if you've heard that concept before. We're going to talk about double empathy and the application to communicative competency. We're going to talk about evidence-based strategies and resources designed to increase emotional language, self-awareness, and problem solving. Again, keying right into that idea of building coping strategies. So a little bit about some neurodiversity advocacy and some of the language that I'm going to be using today. The discussion surrounding autism has really been changing over the past couple of years and more rapidly even in the past few months. The Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, or ASAN, has some really great information from the autistic community about some of their preferences, their thoughts, and support that they're interested in moving forward. A lot of this kind of this research and this advocacy has prompted higher education programs in schools like where I'm at, Chestnut Hill, to look more at affirmative programming for students and really creating affirming programs on campus that are strengths-based approaches versus simply focusing on deficits. So I encourage you to really consider strengths-based approaches, because that's really the push in neurodiversity advocacy right now, and looking at how are we supporting our autistic students and neurodivergent students overall. So historically, the way I was trained, you used person first language. You said this is a person with autism or a person with Down syndrome. And now the discussion is changing a little bit to identity first language, which means an autistic person. So you're putting that, the disability, the diagnosis, or the difference in the forefront as part of that individual's identity. There is still a lot of back and forth with different family members, different members of the community, medical professionals, educators, et cetera, with what's used. So I encourage you to just ask for preferences. Some people may feel more comfortable with using the word autistic, neurodivergent, or person with autism, person on the spectrum. There's so many terms that we can use. Just, be upfront, just ask, because some people do have very strong preferences. I tend to use autistic more because that's the feedback I'm getting from the community that I work with, and that's their preference. So that's typically the terminology that I'm using. You'll see historically the color blue and puzzle pieces have been used to describe autism. More and more now you're moving away from blue, which is more associated with males being diagnosed. We know there's a lot more females now being diagnosed as autistic. So we're moving away from just blue as that color. You're seeing more reds, golds, even rainbow colors being used to express diversity. You're seeing a lot of the infinity symbol being used as well, instead of a puzzle piece, to represent more inclusive practices with different kinds of learning, different kinds of brains. Even the term neurodivergent doesn't solely refer to autistic individuals. You're also looking at other learning differences such as dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, and ADHD, Tourette syndrome. It can refer to any number of brain differences. So when we think about neurodiversity, it's reflecting diversity as a whole, everyone's brain being different. Neurodivergence is really talking about specific ways, like an ADHD brain is different than an autistic brain is different than a neurotypical brain. So big picture, we all contribute to this idea of neurodiversity, but in this presentation, I'm really drilling down to and exploring the neurodivergent students, autistic students in particular. So again, bottom line, have the discussion, be an ally, listen to what autistic individuals say and what their preferences are. So let's have a little reality check. As I mentioned, I worked in the public school setting for a long time. We know that students struggle with independence and engagement in the school setting. Educators, school staff frequently are stepping in, prompting, providing an answer without really allowing for processing time. Without really looking at what is the level of prompt that is that's really needed for the student here. we want to get the job done. We have things to do. There's curriculum to get to. There's goals to address. There's administrators sitting in the back taking notes. We know all of this is going on. And so when we see a student maybe struggling with a coping strategy or not getting started right away, we want to jump in. We want to help. We're helpers. We're in helping professions. That reality is that you're creating students who are heavily, heavily prompt dependent. They struggle with initiation. They're struggling with how to plan and figure out what is it that I'm doing next. They're not, they're basically getting set into a routine of someone else prompts me to do this. Someone else goes and gets my laptop for me and sets it up and puts in the password. Someone else pulls up the Google Classroom code. Someone else goes to my cubby and grabs stuff and brings it to me. Or someone at least tells me and says, hey, you know, reminder, you need to go ahead and go and get these materials for you to do your work today. So I, as a student, am used to kind of just hanging back and letting someone be my frontal lobe, letting someone think for me. And we're creating very, very prompt dependent students. So we first need to kind of recognize that that's not what we want to do. we want to support that idea of empowerment, of independent agency. And if anyone has seen my presentations before on trauma-informed best practices, the ARC framework, you know, we're really looking at that competency piece of the framework here, the ability to make a choice. And so we want to empower students with the ability to make that choice. And that means really looking deeply at what is it we need to do to get them into a space where they're able to select a coping strategy and implement that coping strategy, or select something that they're going to do and go ahead and do it. So when we talk about independent actions and everything, and this is big picture, you know, you're really capturing everything here, but this goes precisely into the development of coping as well. Not just talking about the academic strengths, but really this bleeds into their ability to self-regulate as well. It's not only important to teach the strategy, like, you know, a lot of people use deep breathing or use of a fidget toy or coloring or whatever the strategy may be, but we have to figure out how to use that. How are we accessing it? And when is it appropriate to use it? Because trying to teach a coping strategy while a child is highly dysregulated is just really, really ineffective and is going to increase frustration for everybody. So the idea of dynamic intelligence is really important here. Dynamic intelligence leads to independence. And I'm starting here because getting to the point of independent implementation of coping strategies means that we have to have kind of this dynamic processing in our brain where we're pulling pieces of information together to make a decision. So dynamic intelligence, you might also hear words like growth mindset, you know, risk taking, independent decision making, the analysis of possible outcomes, of problem solving. All of these are really elements to what is it to do when we need to self-regulate. These are all the component parts. Our dynamic intelligence skills, our ability to kind of make decisions and analyze what's happening in a moment, builds connections. So if we think about a dynamic brain, it's like interwoven leaves and branches all coming together. And those pieces allow us to make really informed decisions. Our episodic memory allows us to hold on to that information by connecting connecting the strategies with a meaningful event. So you're more likely to retain that information and use episodic memory if there's like meaning associated with it. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. Static intelligence is where a lot of our neurodivergent students and autistic students really shine. They have concrete knowledge, recitation of facts, following routines. So those are all static intelligence strengths. And again, when we think about that reality check we did, that following a routine, if it's a routine that someone else always tells me when to get up and do this, or someone tells me when to take a deep breath, or someone tells me when I need to access my calming space or one of my toys or anything under the sun, that becomes part of my routine. I'm not thinking about it myself because someone else is actually telling me what to do. We set up firm pathways in the brain instead of that interconnected pathway, which results actually in slower processing. So we talk about coping skills and this kind of a big managing big emotions, right? It's another way of saying that you're self-regulating. It's your self-regulation abilities. So what does that mean? What are we doing when you really break it down? Because sometimes you just think, oh, we just teach the student how to take a deep breath, when it's just so much more complicated than that. As you all know, as educators, working in school systems, it's not as simple as just tell them to do this thing and it'll all be fine. We really need to kind of dig down into the root of it and build from the bottom up to make this a success. So coping strategies are really organizing emotional and physiological responses without the intervention from another person. That's our self-regulation abilities, right? You're able to do that and analyze it yourself. Requires a lot of self-awareness and thinking about your own thinking. It's metacognitive abilities. Co-regulation does come before self-regulation. You learn the skill of self-monitoring through the support of another trusted individual. And this comes up with social referencing, joint attention, theory of mind. All of those pieces tie into this idea of co-regulation and having a trusted individual that guides us and that supports us. So we talk about the episodic memory piece. It is highly important to have a meaningful relationship and to have like kind of that guide relationship with a student where they're open and able to receive the feedback that you're giving, and you're creating these strong connections with the episodic memory. And we're not just doing this like task-based thing. We're not just being their frontal lobe. We're not just thinking for them and doing it, but having this interaction that creates a more dynamic experience, which then empowers the student to be more independent and to start co-regulating and therefore being able to self-regulate. So it is a whole process. Ultimately, again, we want the student to be independent, but explicit teaching and modeling is needed first as part of those like episodic memory events, as part of that collaboration, purposeful working together instead of just coming in and doing for someone. So our coping skills require co-regulation, self-awareness, self-monitoring, and problem-solving skills. So all of these things come into play. And so when we want to start with this, we actually need to take a step back and we need to look at what is it that is essential to build this idea of regulation. Let's start with social referencing, then joint attention, and then theory of mind. So social referencing, I'm sure, I wish I could take a poll now. I obviously can't, but I wonder how many of you are parents, and how many of you as parents have had those moments where your child kind of looks over at you and is maybe reaching for something they shouldn't, and they're kind of seeing, is this okay? And you might frown and shake your head, and they reach back and they go, oh, okay, maybe not. Or they've, fallen down, but it's not so bad. And they look at you to see, like, should I be crying? What should my reaction be? And I guess, not even just parents, but experience that. Aunts, uncles, anyone working with children, you've seen that kind of interaction. What they're doing is actually socially referencing. They're looking at the facial expression of another person and gauging their own reactions off of that. That's part of typical development. You see it in very, very young children. that allows a child to gain confidence in exploring the world around them. Neurodivergent children don't, and specifically autistic children, don't develop that skill of social referencing in the same way. It needs to be more explicitly taught. So without the ability to social reference, it's hard to share an experience with others. You know, you're not processing that you know, the facial expression, you're not processing the emotion. It may be hard to experiment or explore a new environment because there's no guide, there's no person that you're looking at to see, is this safe? Is it okay? Can I move forward? Can I do this? It's hard to co-participate in activities. Like if you think about, you know, playing with another person, playing with another child, if you're not really looking at their face or their expressions or their body language to see what is the scenario, what's the situation, you don't process it, it's not meaningful to you, then it's hard to participate with another person. And then seeking autonomy, that independence. Again, you might have heard a term called like autistic inertia, where we just kind of, there's this stick, you know, it's hard to get started, it's hard to move forward. So that idea of sometimes seeking autonomy versus kind of falling back into routines, if you don't have that co-regulation stability, that kind of referencing to another person, it becomes more difficult. So it's really, really critical to build relationships to develop these skills. To this idea of social referencing, it doesn't have to just be with young children. We can teach and model referencing in older children as well as even I've done it with adults. So it's important to kind of know where to start. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that idea of social referencing when we talk about declarative language, okay? So in the addition to the ability of referencing, joint attention allows for the development of language abilities. So sharing in an experience, sustaining attention on a common element, knowing that you're both talking about one thing, that goes right along with what we were just talking about with social referencing, right? Kind of the idea of connecting and having a shared experience with another person. Using preferred tasks and hobbies is a really great way to work on joint attention. So, and this will also use and incorporate social referencing. So for example, you're doing a coloring activity. Maybe that's a preferred activity for this child, or maybe a writing activity. Passing the utensil, the crayon, the marker, or the pencil, whatever you're using, back and forth with the child and kind of holding on. So like if I have this pencil right here and I'm passing it back to the child, I might hold it while they're trying to take it. And inevitably, if you're holding on to something that they want, a child is going to kind of look up at you. They're not expecting that this isn't just coming to them. They look up at you. You can smile. That's an act of social referencing, right? Just smiling, okay? And maybe saying something like, I'm really enjoying coloring with you. So that's something that you're building a relationship, or, you know, I'm really enjoying writing with you, or you're doing such a great job. Providing some of that like positive reinforcement in terms of building up the social referencing skill, and then the joint attention that you have on this one task. So you're kind of passing back and forth. Maybe you're modulating the amount of time that you get to write versus the child gets to write, or you get to color versus the child gets to color. So they're not consistently expecting what's going to happen. Now, we use, you know, expectations and structure a lot in working with autistic children. So I'm not saying like throw that out the window at all, but I'm saying within the framework of an activity. So say if you're doing this writing task for 5 minutes, within that, you know, maybe the first time you write 2 letters, they write 2 letters, and the next time you write 1. And what this does is you're breaking up the expectations, so they constantly have to reference you to know what's going to happen next. So you're using that to build your own relationship with them, and to improve that idea of social referencing. So again, all of these things are building blocks to this idea of co-regulation, and building the co-regulation to the self-awareness, to the problem solving, to the use of a coping strategy. So you're setting up these building blocks in place in your classroom to make the child more able to independently implement the coping strategies that you're teaching with them. So it's part of this whole idea of creating relationships and having like meaningful interactions that build a bond that then teach you and allow a child to make an independent decision. So it's part of a whole framework. So let's talk about theory of mind, the ability to take into consideration what another person is thinking. So if, you know, I'm sitting here and I'm like looking down like this, you're probably like, oh, she wants to be done. She's, you know, she doesn't want to talk anymore, wants moving on, right? So that's like, you're inferring and taking information that I'm kind of presenting to you, and you're reading my mind in a sense. And we use theory of mind a lot in persuasion, motivation, you know, always thinking about this idea, this concept of theory of mind. It's something that, again, we teach a lot to autistic and sometimes other neurodivergent individuals, this idea that other individuals have a mind that's different than what your own mind might perceive. So you might have a student who thinks that they have to, you know, shout out an answer, or they have to always have the green colored pencil and they don't want to share it with another child. And so this becomes like teaching the concept of, you know, you may think you're the only person that wants the green pencil, but actually, you know, so-and-so also likes the green pencil, wants to use it. So it's this idea of having different perspectives. It's critical to have models of theory of mind, to model that thinking out loud. So in your classroom, I really appreciated that you raised your hand to ask to leave the classroom. So you're showing in that sense, like, yes, you're giving a positive response, but you're showing that something that they did impacts you. That behavior impacts another person. Whatever they thought was going on, maybe they thought, yeah, it's great that I raised my hand, but now you're actually teaching them that not only do they think it's great, it also impacts you, a different human, as well. Or the opposite sense, I'm frustrated that you were taking Charlie's crayons away during the art lesson. So instead of saying, don't do that, like, you know, you shouldn't be doing that. I already told you to stop taking those colored pencils away, or those crayons away. You're now connecting that to an emotion, to an idea. I'm frustrated. Your action impacted me, and I'm teaching you this idea of theory of mind, that your perspective was that you just wanted the crayon. You wanted to use it. There wasn't anything, you know, maliciously intended necessarily, but I'm trying to tell you, hey, that made me really frustrated. Maybe Charlie can express that he's also very frustrated. So you're teaching this concept of my actions have impacts on others, and others see things that happen in different ways. A lot of times, and you'll see a picture of this later, I use thought bubbling strategies and things like that to teach this concept of theory of mind, and to show, like, to present it in a very concrete way. Hey, you did this and you think this, but this impacted another person in this way. So let's talk a little bit about co-regulation. So we've kind of been talking about the building blocks, right? In terms of social referencing, joint attention, and then the idea of theory of mind, that everyone has these different perspectives, different thoughts. So we use those elements to then come up to this idea of co-regulation. So I now know that people have different thoughts. I'm now starting to kind of reference and look at this guide, this teacher I have, this kind of empowering relationship that I have. We have activities that we do together. This person is trusted to me. So I can start building these co-regulation strategies. So co-regulation is really modulating your actions in regards to another person's actions through social referencing and the awareness of those around you. Making mutual adjustments in unpredictable situations, and not like massively unpredictable, but just your everyday situations. Thinking about a person, carrying something heavy with another person. If you've ever tried to move a couch, that is a co-regulation activity. Not one I would suggest with your students, but one that we can all kind of relate to in terms of trying to figure out, okay, like how much weight am I taking? How much weight is the other person taking? You have to always think about, can that person carry this weight? Where are we? And are we on a stairwell? Do we need to shift? Do we need to move? And all of that requires thinking about another person. So like I said, this is only really possible once a trust is established, once you really are understanding that other person and have an awareness of the needs of that person. So what's really important with co-regulation, and I mentioned this before, it's about the journey. It's not about the task itself. We constantly are pushed to, get this done. We need to finish this worksheet. We need to finish this lesson for the day. You're going to finish your assignment. It has to be done, done, done. And that's where we push into starting to overprompt students and starting to do things for them because we're focused on the task. For co-regulation, you really need to not focus on the task. You're focusing on how something is occurring. We need to use that task to continue thinking about our social referencing, our joint attention, and then building to this co-regulation, because then we're able to start with self-awareness. All right. So opportunities for co-regulation occur in schools throughout the day. My favorite one is walking in the hallway. So I used to walk with students and I would vary my pace. I would slow down sometimes, I would speed up. And sometimes the student would just run right on ahead of me. So what I started doing was taking a little ball or a beanbag and trying to toss it back and forth with them. So there's this idea of their having to reference me because I'm the one with the beanbag, and if they want to catch it, they have to turn around. So it could be a preferred item for a child. It really depends on what tool you use to kind of gain attention. And then you're modulating and changing the pacing. And what this is doing is it's allowing the child to kind of come back, be around you and say like, oh, okay, like, oh, she's speeding up now. Now I have to speed up if I want to keep in this activity and what we're doing. And it's not about walking, to whatever classroom we're going to, or the gym or lunch, or, or even just taking a walk for a break. It's really about the experience. And so I'm smiling. I'll say, this is so much fun. I love that you're walking with me, because we're really focused on building this relationship. Passing out papers, again, you're passing to another person. Maybe you hold the paper for a second. So when they take it, they have to kind of look back over at you. All of these things are really targeting into co-regulation, distributing supplies around a classroom, going to a locker, going to a cubby, eating lunch as well. That's more, I've done that more with like families and parents at home, but like food is another way that you can do co-regulation and having like kind of a paired activity. So it's not just about getting something done or finishing it. It's the idea that we're doing this activity together. We're regulating together, and it improves the ability to kind of be in the moment, to be present, aware of your surroundings. You're referencing what's happening. You're starting to understand that other people have these different ideas than you, have different thoughts than you, and that enables students to really start having this kind of partnership in their learning, and start moving them towards feeling a sense of, yes, I can be independent with this. I'm being empowered here. I can make these decisions because I'm in a regulated state of mind. I'm in a safe space. I'm learning these skills, and I can then choose and implement them. Again, we can all jump in and say, hey, you know, you look anxious, you need to do this. And that is one part of the teaching, but it's not the only part, because you'll never teach them to be independent that way. So for co-regulation, creating an optimal environment is crucial. We want to actually reduce demands. For a lot of families of autistic students, and honestly, most neurodivergent students, families are really desperate for that connection. And teachers and educators, because we want our children to be successful, we tend to go and do the thing that the student does well, right? So maybe they really know days of the week, and we're gonna ask them that question every time. Or parents are asking questions. How was your day? What did you learn today? Tell me this, tell me this. All of those things are actually demands. By constantly questioning, constantly providing commands, saying, go here, do this, do that, asking this, that, the other, all of those things are forcing the child and the student to either respond or to do something. And while those are absolutely essential in certain areas of education, they actually cause a lot of anxiety for autistic students, because you're putting all sorts of demands on them. And so it causes this kind of retreat, like this pull back. It's no longer about that interaction. It's about getting something done. And like I said, in some instances, absolutely, that's what needs to happen. We can't be demand avoidant and reducing demands all the time, but there are certain times when it is absolutely essential, and to really help this co-regulation piece. Slow down. Taking the time to process and to reference is really important. We want to watch for the student to initiate whatever activity that we're doing at times, instead of us constantly starting first. We can maybe start that way, but allow for that processing time for a student to initiate something that you're doing, whether it's passing something out, writing something down, pointing to, or if you're, playing a game, taking their turn. Pause and hold yourself back from prompting and saying, hey, you need to do this, and just let them get there. Allow for that prompting. Pause and wait. As an SLP, this is so hard for me to not over prompt. I love to talk, as you can see, but like over prompting and repeating is not helpful. We're gonna talk a little bit more about visual referencing and nonverbal communication, but really using our eyes to kind of glance over if you want them to pick something up. We're looking over here. Or maybe we might point or touch on something that we want to kind of prompt them to start, but that's not, we don't want to use that right at the beginning. We're waiting, and then we might use some visual referencing, some touching, pointing, something like that, versus going ahead and saying like, hey, do this, or doing hand over hand. You want to provide materials at eye level, building rapport, and then making them feel confident to quote unquote take a risk. And this idea of risk is that personal autonomy, right? You're making a decision with no one telling you what to do, to go ahead and initiate. And I have a kind of a funny story about this. I had a student several years ago, and he was a student with an intellectual disability diagnosis and an autism diagnosis. And he was so heavily prompt dependent that when we came to we had a life skills room, and we'd work together in there with a small group, and myself and the OT. And he wouldn't sit down. He wouldn't initiate sitting down until someone told him to sit down. And I was using all my kind of co-regulation strategies and was really trying to work with him on like having him initiate this chair, right? You know, sitting down in this chair. And there was one day when we came in and I sat down and I just smiled and I looked at him and I said, you know, gosh, I'm sitting here by myself. There's another chair. I'm really excited for what we're going to do today. I'm really looking forward to it. And I just waited. And he was looking at me and I eventually kind of reached over towards the chair, but I didn't touch it. And then it took, and I timed it, took 7 minutes for him to sit down in the chair, but he did initiate. And from then on, he was able to initiate and sit down on his own. And it wasn't about prompting him or telling him. And you started seeing more and more with the student that he started being able to initiate and say like, oh, this, you know, point to his communication device to indicate what he wanted without someone prompting and going like, oh, do you want this or this? He was the one independently telling what he wanted. And it just started with the small things like sitting in a chair. And then it became more about this initiation. And it became more about him asking to use the bathroom when he had been on a bathroom schedule and still had been having accidents intermittently. You know, it became much more that he was in charge and making these decisions, and he had a better quality of life because of it. You know, was able to choose what he needed to do, when he needed to use the bathroom, when he wanted to access some of the sensory materials. Those were all things that he started initiating for himself, and that's just critically important. And I talked about language and questioning, and let's go do a little bit of a deeper dive here. So imperative language is prompts, asking questions, giving directives, do this, get that pencil, who's ready to work. All of those things are kind of putting a demand on the child. So that's all imperative language. Like I said, sometimes we have to use imperative language. It's inevitable. Declarative language is you're kind of commenting or describing. So when I talked about doing the walking activity and throwing the ball, and I said, yeah, I really enjoy doing this with you. This is a lot of fun, throwing a ball back and forth. There's no demand. I'm simply commenting and describing what's happening in the world around me. Creating, I wonder why John doesn't have his computer. I'm not telling John to get his computer. I'm not telling John, you know, or asking like, why don't you have it? I'm just saying, I wonder why he doesn't have his computer. And so it's then you're providing this almost level of prompt to the child that's very, very mild level to initiate and comment and think through, what is it I'm going to do here? What is my next step? To go and maybe go and get that computer, we hope, right? Or to go and get the material. And so this declarative language is like one of the least intrusive prompting strategies that you can use before you go into anything more heavy-handed. And it allows a child to really have that agency and think for themselves. And again, why is this so important when we think about self-regulation and coping strategies is because no matter if you are just, you know, teaching and explaining, hey, you're going to go and take deep breaths. Hey, you're going to use this strategy. It's not going to help the child become independent at implementing and recognizing when they need to use those strategies if they aren't given all the like agency pieces prior to that. So this building up of independence and autonomy and being able to make decisions is critically important, on top of the idea of using a coping strategy itself. And we're just about there. Okay, so we talked about dynamic intelligence right at the beginning. Dynamic intelligence and declarative language go hand in hand. We are encouraging those connections by talking less, waiting more, and encouraging that episodic memory and having the child analyze and make a decision on their own by commenting, by saying and describing what's going on, we're giving actually a lot of modeling, a lot of support, but we're not creating demand. So we're still in that positive environment. Dynamic intelligence really allows students to build up to self-awareness skills and to think about what do they need to do in this moment, okay? So looking for opportunities for problem solving, using wait time and using nonverbals. I used to do this all the time. I would leave my door locked and I'd have like my key, you know, on my lanyard, and I would just try to open the door and I'd wait for the student to initiate what needed to happen. And, you know, sometimes it took a while, but I would always get faster responses the more that I did it. They might point to the key. They might say, you know, open the door. So all of these things are what you want in terms of the student is initiating, they're recognizing the problem, they're problem solving, and then they're telling you or sharing with you or indicating to you in some way what needs to happen next. So those are things that we want to see. You know, leaving the lights partially off, not having enough chairs to sit around a table. This is all just functional problem solving. What are we doing here? How do we improve this? We don't have materials for a task. This is what we want to do. This is what we want to create, but I don't have any of the elements here. And presenting obstacles. So this would be, you know, for someone working with someone with a physical disability, and you're trying to use these same problem solving strategies, you know, using obstacles to have a student indicate to someone that they need to move around them versus someone just doing it for the student. I've worked with several students with physical disabilities, and the student was a wheelchair user, and he never really, you know, said anything to the people moving his wheelchair, because I just always took him wherever he wanted to go. And then we started just waiting, and we wouldn't start until we wouldn't start pushing him until he said something. And so he started saying go, but then he started also saying wait. And he'd say wait because he wanted his friends to come up and catch up with him. So it's very, that was a lot of fun to teach that to him, to see that agency of him being able to say when he wanted to go, when he wanted to stop, instead of just taking that and doing it for him. So all of these things in declarative language really actually helps with motivation. So again, beyond this idea of task completion and just getting something done is not it's not intrinsically motivating. So a lot of times we do use reward-based systems, you know, tokens, whatever. I want you to move away from tokens a lot, because that's really focusing on the task. And the whole idea here is not task-based, it's journey-based. So we don't always want this idea of a transaction to be motivation. We don't want a child to always think that you want or you need something from them in order for them to engage with you. We want to engage with a child because we want to engage with them. We want them to learn and to be happy and to grow. And so by just making it transactional, it becomes very limiting in terms of where that relationship can lead. And you're not going to be able to build into that idea of co-regulation and to support that self-awareness and that agency and problem solving that we're working towards. Communicate that you're enjoying time together. And use a lot of declarative language. So just like it's a different frame of reference of thinking about how we're motivating, how we're promoting independence, besides just using like more prompt-based strategies, and really digging down into what is it that we need to do for a child to really analyze, problem solve, and figure it out for themselves and have these positive experiences. So moving out from co-regulation and moving into this idea of self-awareness and self-monitoring, it does come down to teaching about emotional vocabulary when we're specifically talking about managing these big emotions, okay? If we don't know the words to describe our emotions, or we don't have a connection to them, we can't name them, sometimes then it becomes really hard to be aware of them. If there's not a word that you're associating with this feeling, you might recognize a feeling, but you don't really know what to do with it. So modeling and enhancing emotional vocabulary is really, really critical. So I have some visuals here of like just having this information up in the classroom, and I use boxes sometimes to reflect, or like different shapes to reflect words that go together. So this idea of relaxed, cool, and calm, like these go together in our clouds. Uneasy, scattered, these go together in our squares. So it's not about necessarily saying like these are negative words or positive words. It's just like grouping them as a cohort and providing a visual associated with it to enable a student to remember it better. Another way to build the self-awareness with emotions, again, using maybe a target term and having the student fill in the synonyms, and then hanging this up, having it accessible, maybe putting it on a desk. I use a lot of colors associated with stuff like this. You'll see that on the next slide. So again, times that you're happy. When's a time that something that makes you happy? What about others? This is taking into account this perspective taking ability. And then you're building self-awareness because you're reflecting on your own actions, reflecting on the things that make you happy, angry, sad, excited. So you're thinking about all of these pieces and building that within the student as well, because you've been consistently working on this, the co-regulation piece. You're in a good place. You're seeing more initiation of activities and initiation of things, more agency. And now we're teaching the skills for self-awareness to start building that emotional awareness that then we start putting names to. Okay, well, you told me that you get really happy when it's time for recess. And I can see that. I see that you look so happy right now. Another word for happy is, and you go back over to your, the synonyms chart that you made over here. Or other way, you're angry. Well, sometimes you said, sometimes you get angry if you don't have your favorite snack. Definitely seen that happen a lot. If you don't have your favorite snack, and I can see, your face is really tense, you're looking angry. And another word for angry is upset. Maybe we associate it with a color. So it's modeling and building this language so the student can start understanding their own feelings. And then this is an example of a word wall. Like I said, sometimes I'll put colors associated with the words as well, and not just shapes. It just depends. Depends on the student, and allow the student to pick their colors in terms of what makes them happy, or what color they associate with happy or what color they associate with worried. It doesn't necessarily have to be what you would choose. So I'm going to pause here for 1 second because I'm going to read something to you guys. It's in order for you to get credit for this webinar, okay? So thank you for participating in this webinar. To obtain a certificate of completion, you must fill out the form at the certificate of completion link provided on the email for this training. Please write down this code as it will be required to receive the certificate. LS092022. Again, the code is LS092022. And one more time, LS092022. Okay, thank you. So moving forward to build this idea of self-awareness, this is another visual that you can use. This is looking at the skills that someone has, that's something that they're very strong at. What is a different perspective from a friend? What is something maybe they're an apprentice and they're not as good at, and something that they're very new to and they are a newbie, and what is their friend's perspective? This is also good for doing interviews with other students to find out, see that interaction and find out how self-aware we are, the things that we do really well, the things that we really like doing, and using that to our advantage when we're considering the problem solving for coping skills. All right, so developing coping cards. So now we're in this idea of self-monitoring. So we're building up the resources. If I have a coping card and I'm going to be in control of my anger. When my body feels tight, when my thoughts are racing, I will do this to feel better. I'm going to take a breath. I'm going to take a walk. I'm going to sip some water. I'm going to do 5 jumping jacks. I'm going to flap if that's something that that makes me feel better. That's what I'm going to do, as long as it's not, causing harm to others. I really encourage the use of the coping strategies that is most effective for the child, in whatever that may be. Like I said, if it's not harming others. So these kinds of cards are things that we do in our recognition of the strategies that I'm going to need when I want to problem solve and choose a coping strategy. So this is like, that self-monitoring. This is the tool that I'm going to have ready. Okay. Ranges of regulation. You guys have seen zones of regulation, ranges of regulation. The important thing with any regulation tool is that you're not just using it when the child's upset. We really want to consider and use it on a regular basis, every day, multiple times a day, because all of us have different feelings, different emotions throughout our day. We don't just feel one way. We don't just start the day off and then we're happy and then we're happy the rest of the day. So learning that my range of regulation fluctuates is part of this idea of self-monitoring and self-awareness. Okay, so I'm kind of zoned out after lunch. I'm starting to learn that I struggle a little bit more after lunch. I'm in tears because I'm just overwhelmed right now. It's the beginning of the day. I just left my mom and I'm not handling it well. So just like things like that, it's starting to become aware of what's happening. And you can even start seeing those kinds of trends in students, but this is a teaching tool. It's not designed to be like, no, this is not good. You're in tears and that's a bad thing. There's no judgment on these emotions. It's a teaching tool to help understand what emotion we're at and what that means and what that means I can do. If I'm frozen, I maybe need to kind of get up and move around. It's maybe not a good time for me to be sitting and reading at my desk. Maybe I need to come up. Maybe I need to read something on the wall instead of doing that activity. So it's kind of building this awareness of what needs to happen. If I'm in tears, I'm probably not going to be very successful in getting things done, right? So that's when we want to look more at, offering some of those coping cards that we talked about previously, and doing a reminder or reflecting on a social story. So social stories or coping cards and different things. I'm trying to think of the power cards. That's the other one I use a lot. Using strategies like that and reflecting on them consistently throughout the day, that also builds your self-monitoring abilities and explicitly teaches problem solving, because the power cards and the social stories themselves tell you what you're supposed to be doing. Like in a Spider-Man power card, Spider-Man does these 3 things really well. And if your student is really excited by Spider-Man, he wants to model and look at what Spider-Man does well too. So building momentum through self-monitoring, your reflective practices, supporting empowerment, that idea of agency, using visuals to make self-monitoring concepts concrete. We're using a checklist, a rubric, using scales sometimes. All of those things make self-monitoring more concrete. You're modeling, transitioning to independence, and you're allowing children to choose the things that work for them. Okay, so this is what I was speaking about in terms of our perspective taking and thought bubbling, empathy mapping. What do you think this other person is thinking? What can you say in order to show empathy in a situation? How does the other person feel? How do you feel? What can you do to show empathy? This is the teaching of self-monitoring and self-awareness, and in the guise of perspective taking. Like, I'm self-monitoring because I'm thinking about what I need to say to show empathy, what I need to do, and how I'm impacting the other person. The concept of double empathy is not that new, but it's gaining a lot more traction recently. So there's this kind of outdated notion that autistic individuals aren't empathetic. And it's just neurodivergent individuals experience empathy. They simply process their world differently. So I don't want you to think like autistic don't have emotions or, this, that, or the other. They have trouble explaining their experiences with them, have trouble regulating because their brains are actually different than a neurotypical brain, which is why we use these strategies and do the social referencing. And we are very explicit with our visuals, but it doesn't mean they don't have this concept of empathy. So when we think about double empathy and we maybe think about interactions between students, a lot of times we really focus in on the neurodivergent student, the autistic student, and say, these are your goals. You have to do this many turns. You have to do this. You have to think about what topics are preferred, for the other individual. Are they sick of you talking about, trains, and, you have to read it in their facial expression? That's a lot to put on one person. So the concept of double empathy is that these interactions and, the way that we're supporting social interaction and emotional wellness overall is not all put on the goal of this one individual, this one neurodivergent individual, but it's actually a joint collaborative effort in that we're raising awareness in all of our students that some students learn differently and some students may have a hard time with their emotions, and we don't want to make fun of them, and we don't want to, you don't want to make them feel bad. So here are some things and some strategies that you can use when having this conversation. Maybe you can tell someone, hey, I really like talking about this. Let's talk about that, instead of leaving it up to another person to figure out what you want to talk about. So being mindful of that, conversations and dialogues and those interactions are really, they're equally responsible for outcomes there. So with double empathy, when we think about emotional wellness of students overall, we think about children making decisions in how they're having the best experience in their school. It's not just about the neurodivergent students, doing all these things. It's also neurotypical students. It's really all students. So providing inclusive opportunities for all, as we expand on this idea of co-regulation strategies, self-awareness strategies for students, supporting the understanding that, hey, so-and-so might be using a coping card, and you may have students who are neurotypical using those kinds of resources, but explaining what they are, not being othering to students who have different strategies and tools that they're using, but really making sure that everyone understands kind of what's going on. So the responsibility is on everybody, not just on this one student. Don't be singled out or isolated for using strategies. These have an evidence base for neurodivergent students, but they're supportive for all students to use. And when we look at problem solving and then ultimately resilience, right? That's our buzzword now. We're reinforcing typical information processing pathways for students. So we've been building up the sense of regulation. We're building this self-awareness, self-monitoring. So maybe a student's starting to realize that they're escalating a little bit, that they're starting to feel some tension here. We've done all this work on on building our emotional vocabulary, on when I feel my body doing this. So we're recognizing and identifying the problem. Now I'm going to consider solutions. What are the coping strategies that I've been using that you've been offering to them? Maybe it's music, maybe it's taking a walk, jumping jacks, any number of things. Okay, we're going to consider that. We're going to make a plan. Okay, what are we going to do? So our plan is maybe choosing one of those strategies, and I'm going to do it. So we're clarifying these cause and effect relationships. We're connecting emotions with our problem solving skills. So all of this comes into the self-awareness and self-monitoring and use of those visuals we've been looking at. Okay, so this is a soccer table. What is our option? What's our situation? What's happening? Starting to feel nervous about taking a test. It could be that I'm, in a lot of stomach pain, anything. What are our different options? What is the consequence? That's connecting causal relationships. And then what is our choice ultimately? What are we doing? This is another example of a SOC table for older students. We write down our situation. Cafeteria ran out of milk. What are our options? I can scream. I can throw the milk down. I can take 5 deep breaths. I can, tell the lunch lady that I want milk back in the cafeteria. And all of those options have consequences. Which one are we going to do? And then we evaluate after the situation happens. So this is a visual structure to problem solving that you can utilize. And I've had the milk situation occur. It was chocolate milk specifically that they didn't have in the cafeteria. So I actually did use this tool for breaking down situations, and it's very, very helpful for students to be able to kind of reflect on. And this is not something we do in the heat of the moment. It's something we do as a teaching tool to teach our problem solving strategies, so that in the moment, again, we're reflecting on, we're rebuilding that problem solving loop. We're reflecting on, we're considering our choices, we're making a plan, and then we're acting. And this breaks down those elements. So some examples of coping cards for our younger children. Okay. Thinking about calm and relaxed mindsets, how to problem solve, brainstorming solutions. So this is, again, just a visual tool to use to make these concepts concrete. Because if we just talk about them, then there's nothing to reference. There's nothing to go to when a student's trying to make that decision, when they're trying to consider the options and act. We want to have those visuals. Okay. Strengthening our problem solving pathways by always returning to this relaxed state. And that's part of the co-regulation, part of the guiding relationship, being in a space where the student feels supported and empowered to be able to make decisions, not sitting back, waiting, lacking independent skills, not waiting for you to tell them what to do, not being so dysregulated in their own body and not having the language for it, that all of a sudden we see going from here all the way up and just escalating. So really kind of considering all the pieces here to maintain this relaxed mindset. Calm problem solving, check-ins. This is, again, our visual emotional check-ins that we want to do on a regular basis, not just once a day or not just when the child's frustrated. You can use a 1 to 5 scale. You can use any number of things. Validating feelings, not saying, oh, well, you shouldn't be mad because it's just a crayon that broke. In that situation, the child feels what they feel. So putting language to that, and then kind of reflecting and helping them make a choice about the coping strategy they want to use is more effective than saying you shouldn't be mad right now because it's just a crayon. And then think about what energy you're giving off. You want to make sure that you're not escalating the situation by your tone, by your posturing, and by just the volume that you're speaking at. So opportunities for new learning. We want to really grab at those dynamic learning opportunities, functional problem solving, allowing child to reference you during new learning opportunities, and that building a relationship piece, and then using an expectant delay. So kind of that's that wait time. When you're doing something new, allowing the child to try it first and initiating before you jump in and prompt them. Visuals take abstract concepts and make them concrete. We want to reference the visual support, and it's supporting the direct instruction of the targeted skill. It's critical for the development of that emotional vocabulary and all of those pieces. And so that as a teaching tool is critical when you're looking at your self-awareness and self-monitoring and building the problem-solving pathways. Okay. We always want to make sure that we're tapping into student interests. We're thinking about the things that the students are really, really interested in and what works for them. And when we're starting with that co-regulation piece way back at the beginning, starting with things that are of interest to them encourages that initiation and engagement. And that leads to the empowerment piece, which is just agency, being able to make decisions, building choices into daily practice instead of telling students constantly what they need to be doing, validating emotions, validating experiences, creative expression, and then feedback and reflection opportunities. Just like we saw on the SOC table, the last one was to evaluate and revise, this the ER. Keeping connected with families. Carryover of strategies. So if you're using coping strategies in your classroom, share them with families. Be consistent in the implementation, share the goal information. And then you can even use tools like rating scales to see what the parent thinks their child needs to work on, to see if you guys are on the same page, facilitate the connection, facilitate discussion of what's going on. Yeah. So today we went through a lot. We talked about our kind of the building up of self-regulation strategies, a very systematic way, looking at starting with this idea of co-regulation and the breakout of co-regulation being social referencing, joint attention, theory of mind, and then coming into co-regulation, self-awareness, self-monitoring, and then problem solving and empowerment. And so I thank you guys so much for being here with me today. I think we're a few minutes over, but thank you for listening. I hope that you learned some awesome strategies. I would appreciate if you ever wanted to reach out on Facebook, LinkedIn. I'm really not so active on Instagram. I just like to look at the cute puppy pictures, but you have my contact information there, or on Twitter as well. So I'd be happy to connect with any of you. And here are my references for this presentation, and I encourage you to explore these. There's some really great references. To learn more about declarative language, please check out Linda Murphy's book. She does a great job with examples and breaking it down. So thank you all so much for your time, and I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day.